Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Svetlana Melnik, and I'm a senior teacher at the Slavic and Eastern European Languages and Cultures at Indiana University. And today it is my pleasure to be the host of yet another seminar organized by us. The first presenter is a well-known researcher in Ukraine, Rostислав Mельників, professor of Kharkiv National Pedagogical University, named after M. Skovroda. And he is the head of the Cafedra of Mr. Oshkalov. He is interested in history of Ukrainian language of the 20th century and modern Ukrainian literature. Mr. Mельників wrote the monograph Mike Johansen, Blankets or Transformations, and the book of essays, The Literary 1920s, as well as various articles dedicated to history of literature of the 20th century. Rostislav also is the person who edited the biggest collection of works by Hwilowý, and his today's presentation will be dedicated to this person specifically, to Mr. Hwilowý. It is a pleasure to see all of you and present once again. I'm glad that we have this amazing program, and we hope that you will secure funding for continuing this program, because it truly is an amazing platform for communication and an amazing way to support researchers and scholars in Ukraine. And of course, today I will be speaking about Mykola Hwilowý. Well, probably we should have discussed it a year ago when it was his birthday's anniversary. And in the center of Kharkiv city, the street was named after him, and Smolosky Publishing House finally published the 5th volume of Hwilowý's works. And it is amazing that we managed to publish it thanks to the program of the University of Indiana. Now, regarding Hwilowý, again, more and more people are talking about him, given that Taras Tomenko's film saw the world. And again, many people started asking a question: who was he? Basically, who was Mr. Kirillov? Because this is the name that his parents gave him back in the day. He was born on December 13, 1893, in Trostanets, Slobozhan region. However, the information about his family is pretty fragmented. And as Hwilowý himself stated in his brief biography of 1924, his father, Grigory Alexeyevich Vitilov, is a people's teacher, populist, dreamer, and a person careless to the highest degree. Pavlo Petrenko, the writer's compatriot and biographer, in his study, Mykola Hwilowý's strategy, reveals more detailed information. His father came from an impoverished noble family. Due to revolutionary activity, he was forced to leave Kharkiv University and teach in the countryside. In Trostanets, he met his future wife, Yelisaveta, the daughter of Ivan Ivanovich Tarasenko, who was working as an accountant for the local sugar mill millionaire, Leopold Koenig. Among other intriguing details, we learned that the writer's maternal grandfather was born in a so-called illegal marriage between a Frenchman and a Ukrainian peasant woman. His mother's brother, who was nationally conscious, was Mykola's closest mentor and oldest friend, defended the ideals of the Ukrainian People's Republic, who died a hero's death. And her sister was married to a wealthy landowner, Mykola Smakovsky. Horik Kostyuk, relying on the statements of the writer's cousin Larisa Smakovska, mentioned the surname of another maternal relative who was an impoverished landowner but a very cultured, liberal, and influential Zemstvo official, and his surname was Savage. It is notable that the Savage family had Kazakh Starshina origin and belonged to the most respected noble families of the Slavic Ukraine. The Savage couple had no children, so they devoted all their love to Mykola. The closeness of family relations is also proved by the fact that in the mid-20s, Hwilowý took in his aunt, who was a widow at that time. It was the Smakovskys and the Savages who took care of young Vitilov after his parents divorced. Tired of her husband's poverty and drunkenness, Yelisaveta Ivanivna, along with her children, the elder Mykola and his 3 sisters and a brother, in 1904 and 1905, moved to her sister's home in the farmstead Zubivka. When she found a job as a teacher, the Smakovskys persuaded her to leave Mykola with them and allow them to take care of his further education. Uncle Smakovsky's effort and financial support allowed Mykola to study at the Kollontai Primary School and later at the Krasnokutsk High Primary School. And this, along with Uncle Savoy's library, which is an addition to world classics, included many Ukrainian books, a notable collection for the time, undoubtedly had an impact on the teenager. Moreover, this impact extended beyond the general cultural level, contributing to the further national education of the teenager. As a recent Smakov's columnist, during breaks between classes, Mykola would recite the poetry of Shevchenko and other Ukrainian poets to her from memory in good Ukrainian. And we should emphasize this given where his father came from. Ukrainian sympathies in the soul of the young man were also supported by Silvanovsky, a teacher of the Kollontai school, and his wife. Additionally, Krivohatsky, a teacher of the Krasnokut school, played a great role in the formation of the young Mykola's national worldview. On the other hand, during this period, the father, who was a teacher at the Krasnokut craft school, joined the formation of the future writer. His ideological influence was especially important when he encouraged Mykola to study Russian classical literature, in particular populist writers, to get to know Dickens, Hugo, Flaubert, Hoffman, and to get carried away with the revolutionary ideas. The latter became an obstacle to the continuation of his studies, first in Ochtyrka Gymnasium, as he was forced to quit due to his involvement in the so-called Ukrainian revolutionary circle. After some time, a similar fate awaited him in Bohodunov Gymnasium. Writing about that, Petrenko mentions, first of all, his connection with socialist revolutionaries. In addition to this, he also discusses Mykola's unruly character and defiant attitude toward the gymnasium authorities. After living with his relatives for a while, he started traveling because, as Khvylov admitted, he was then fascinated by Gorky and his wandering Russia. And Pitilov, like a true vagabond, did not stay anywhere for long. He worked as a laborer in the boiler shop of Drushkivka plant, as a porter in the Taganrog port, at a brick factory near Don village of Ilovaiska, and as a porter of coke in Horlivka. This life lasted until the beginning of the World War I, when the general mobilization and his conscription age forced him to return home. At first, he secured a job as a locksmith at the Krasnokutsk craft school, and we can assume that it happened with his father's help. However, he soon moved to the village of Demyanivka, Rublivka Volus, Pohoduhiv district, where his mother was teaching. While working in the office of the parish administration, Khvylov engaged in active cultural and educational activities. In July 1916, Khvylov introduced his friends to his writing for the first time, and as emphasized in the memoirs, he immediately started writing in Ukrainian. And already in fall, he volunteered to go to the front. And here, I would like to mention that, obviously, Shehemahan, the author of this memoirs, was slightly mistakenly naming the years, because maybe it happened either earlier or later, because according to the writer himself, in the early 1915, he was dispatched to the front line, and it lasted 3 years. 3 years of campaigns, hunger strikes, real horror, which I will not risk describing. 3 years of Golgotha in a square, through the Volyn marshes, Galicia and the Carpathians, Poland, Bukovina, that ended in Romania. It was there that the revolution finds him. Private Fitilov was active in politics, a member of the Regimental Council of Soldiers' Deputies, a delegate to the Army Congress. He was close with the representatives of Ukrainian national parties, but did not join any party. At the end of 1917, he returned home and continued to engage in political work. A significant impetus for this was his acquaintance with Andrei Zalivchi, one of the leaders of the Youth Union founded in Kharkiv in 1915, especially the Borod-based. And he joined the Central Committee of Selanska Spilka. And his life for literature also did the contribution to that. That is why he immediately engaged in building the network of the Union. Additionally, during this time, he served at the head of Prosvita, Enlightenment, participating in concerts and performances. With the onset of the Hetmanate and the German occupation, he assumed the role of head starosta. I'm sorry, Rostislav. Probably you could slightly slow down so that our interpreters could catch up with you. But they are supposed to have the text that is already translated. I sent it to them. Thank you so much. But nevertheless, it's just that people have the translated version. So that is why I thought that I could do it with the speed. Anyways, his close friend Boris Kolos was arrested and he relocated to Kharkiv. And this first visit to Kharkiv was very brief. He soon gets under suspicion, and he had to go back home and stay there in an illegal position. At first, he joined the rebel unit of the Murahivska Republic, led by the Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionary Pushkar, and even performed the duties of the chief of staff. However, soon, likely due to ideological differences, he parted ways with the loyalists of the Central Rada of Moravians. Together with his younger brother Alexander, who had participated in the Moscow Bolshevik uprising against cadets in November 1917, he organized his own insurgent unit of Free Cossacks, which fought against Hetman and German units. After the victory of the anti-Hetman uprising, Mykola Fytilov was elected head of Rublivka Volist. However, the Free Cossacks were not eager to join the ranks of the regular army of the Ukrainian People's Republic. One should also take into account Fytilov's close connection with the Borodbists, who at the end of 1918 advocated the transfer of power into the hands of the workers and working peasantry. Aside from that, they decided to even work together with the Bolsheviks so that they could support the Soviet government. Meanwhile, Bolshevik Russia launched its second campaign against Ukraine. On January 3, 1919, the Red Army occupied Kharkiv, and on January 6, the puppet Provisional Workers' Peasant Government of Ukraine approved the new name of the state, the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic. The troops of the Ukrainian People's Republic retreated to the west. The detachment of the Fytilovs retreated to Opishna. They planned an uprising and thereby speeding up the arrival of the Red Army. So, the leadership of the Directory Army decided to disarm the Rublivka insurgents, but since they scattered among the houses, because back then the Orthodox Christmas was celebrated, they limited themselves to the arrest of the commander, Mykola Fytilov, and several Cossacks. Only chance saved his life, the life of the future writer. He managed to escape. Unfortunately, the rest of the detainees were shot. By the way, the fates of the soldiers of the Rublivka detachment were very different. For instance, the writer's brother, Alexander Fytilov, a communist Bolshevik, continued his service in Vitaly Primakov's Red Cossack troops and died in the battles for Perekop. On the other hand, his closest assistant, Semyon Koba, quickly became disillusioned with the new government and once again gathered the rebels, this time to fight against the food requisitionist detachment. It is interesting that when Koba ran out of all possibilities of conducting hostilities, Mykola Hvilovy did not abandon his brothers in arms and helped them obtain new passports and get legalized. This was a very interesting fact. And Grigory Kostyuk, who was analyzing everything that he could only find in Northern America and Australia and Europe, when together with Mr. Shavilov, they were preparing the previous 5-volume edition, he found this unique detail. In the meantime, the war continued. And when the volunteer army started coming, Fytilov participated in creating the Bodohodufy Regiment, and in June 1919, he went to the front. At first, there were battles in his motherland. As a result, the regiment perished, and Hvilovy, as a usual soldier private, retreated without the units of the Red Army. Already near Orvel, he became a political worker of the headquarters of the 52nd Division and almost ended up under a tribunal due to the betrayal of his immediate leadership. The event led to a month imprisonment and subsequent acquittal, but this is an official version. In reality, he was sentenced to death, but a young, black-eyed female communist saved him from death. At least that was what Hvilovy told Ivan Senchenko. That female communist was Yulia Umantseva, who later became the writer's second wife. By the way, this detail also explains how Cheka interrogated people back in the day, and oftentimes Hvilovy is being blamed that he also belonged to Cheka, given all of the details mentioned in his works. Nevertheless, there is no evidence whatsoever about him being part of Cheka. However, it is mentioned that he was imprisoned by Cheka when he was on the other side, when he was the one who was interrogated. And this basically debunks one of the myths. By the way, this myth is well known, and every time Hvilovy is mentioned, they say, oh, he belonged to Cheka, he killed his own mother. but in fact, she lived longer than him. There's a picture, and during this presentation, I will also share this picture with you. But when Kostyuk was preparing the 5-volume of Hwilowie's works, he even found the picture of the mother from the day of her funeral. And this basically debunks the myth of Hwilowii as the person who murdered his own mother. In October 1919, Nestor Makhno's successful raids in the rear of the White Force changed the situation at the front. The Red Army went on counterattack, and by winter, Hwilowii had returned to Ukraine. He was seconded to the political department of the Southern Front and engaged in editorial and publishing work. In the spring of 1920, he found himself in the war zone again as a political worker of the 2nd Cavalry Army, although he did not directly participate in military operations. He prepared propaganda proclamations for the White Guard soldiers and collaborated with the army newspaper. After the victory over Wrangel, he served for some time in the Caucasus, and from there he was transferred to Kharkiv. He worked in the cultural and educational sector of the Kharkiv military district. The military debut of the writer came at this time, excluding, of course, his earlier propaganda campaign in Demyan Bedny style for posters and the army press. And by the way, I have heard comments why, when preparing the 5-volume edition, I didn't present all of his works, even though I mentioned it earlier. And I explained it in the following way when responding to this comment, because it was works of the Fitilo, but we're talking about Hwilowii as a writer. And as a writer, he never even considered those works himself, the same as the ones that were written under the pen name of Dadko Mykola. In the 1920s issue of magazine Znanya, Knowledge for the year 1920, his poem I Now Love the City appeared, signed as Stefan Karol. And this was the first debut of Mykola Hwilowii. Torn between Kharkiv and Bohotukhov, family life motivated the young family man, now already a father, to do this. He made an attempt to be closer to his wife Katerina Hashenka and their daughter Iraida. In the beginning of 1920, he was managing the after-school network of the Department of Public Education of the Bohotukhov district, but in spring he finally moved to Kharkiv, where a completely new life began for him, that of Mykola Hwilowii. In this phase, the writer sought to erase his Fitilov period, leaving its echoes and reflections only for his artistic works. We can only guess what he was guided by and what the grounds and reasons were. His family origins, in his brief biography written in 1924 during the party purging, Hwilowii did not say a word about his mother or her family, as well as his father. We find out only some brief details: family relations, personal tragedies, his brother's death, divorce, and the impossibility to communicate with his daughter, change in value, orientations, etc.
На це вже не отримаємо. Рік 1921 став визначальним не лише в біографії письменника.
Unfortunately, we will never learn more about his family relations. 1921 became a decisive year not only in his writer's biography, but also in general for him. The period of national liberation struggles, interventions, and fratricidal struggle was moving into the next phase, intending for the generation whose youth fell on the fronts of the First World War. Circumstances were quite difficult for many. For some, it was immigration. For others, the desire to go and to do whatever it takes to work for their nation on their native land. Mykola Hwilowii was destined to become the spokesman of this generation in his artistic and journalist work. The center of literary life of the new Ukrainian capital at the time was the editorial office of Vysty Woods, the editor-in-chief of which was Vasily Lanblakitny. And he was an editor of the newspaper Borodba. He makes every effort to collect the scattered Ukrainian literary forces in the Republic, and he contributed to the release of a publication by Pavel Kubenko, later known as Ostap Vyshnya, who arrived in Kharkiv from the last capital of the Ukrainian People's Republic in a prisoner's vehicle. He also helps Serhiy Pilipenko after the arrest by the Cheka and the ban on holding important positions for half a year to resume journalistic and literary and organizational activities. He also supports Volodymyr Susura. Thus, in March 1921, allows fellow party member and former Borodba employee Boris Kolos directed his countryman and old friend to the editorial office of Visti because there was simply no better environment for Mykola Hwilowý. And as Kostuk emphasizes, it was this circle of young writers in the early 20s that lit the first torches of the new post-revolutionary literary process. After arriving in Kharkiv, the writer worked in the editorial department of the Hall of Politosvita, the main department of political education at the publishing house Redway, and immersed himself in literary work. In the same year, under his direct participation, the almanacs Stabel and Na Spoloch appeared, and the magazine Szlachy Mistectwa, The Path of Arts, were published. Additionally, his poem Elektryczny wiek in the Electric Age was printed as a separate publication, as well as his collection of poetry Молодість, The Youth. Mykola Hwilowý is a well-heeled poet who was not completely understood by the audience. He is complex and refined, according to Koryak. On the 16th of January 1992, under the initiative of Mykola Hwilowý, the All-Ukrainian Federation of Proletarian Writers and Artists was established with 3 centers in Kharkiv, Kyiv, and Moscow. In the declaration of the newly formed organization, alongside socially important slogans, were the main artistic and aesthetic principles that were to become defining for its members, such as the task of the Federation is to present a powerful moment of the break in their artistic creativity and capture of the everyday life of the transitional period of the revolution. In the analysis of the illness and adaptation of the psyches of numerous social strata, we will find new ways for the formation of proletarian culture and new healthy characters for the future. End of the quote. Therefore, this federation was looking for proletarian art. The attitude to the vexing national issue was presented ambiguously. We understood the federation was not an anarchism of this group, but also there was a denial of national art. We categorically declare that all writers of the federation who will not adhere to our program and will follow the old path of bourgeois ideology or the path of nationalism will be excluded and expelled from our team. But at the same time, the authorized members of the Federation declared it's time for proletarian art to embark on a new direction. The development of the industrial proletariat in Ukraine occurs at the expense of peasant reserves, which are appropriated from time to time. Therefore, educating this proletariat exclusively in the Russian language means delaying its cultural development. It means turning them into the so-called werewolves, ochols, which means people with low cultural outlook. At the end of March 1992, while describing the literary processes of the days, Volodymyr Koryak mentions that the Federation was a stronghold of the modern writers. But at the same time, this federation was not very functional, and Hwilowý didn't succeed in making it more operational or more influential. At the same period, the collection of stories, Sini Etude, Blue Etudes, and Osing Autumn were published. But despite his active and fruitful creative work, the writer was not immune to organizational fever. As early as 1922, he began conceiving the idea of a new organization, which within a year was realized as the Union of Proletarian Writers, HART. Headed by Vasil Elan Blakitny, and it was found on completely different grounds. But at the same time, the writers of this new time are the proletariat writers, according to Elan Blakitny. They were more focused on the proletarian ideology. But this approach was not acceptable for Hwilowý. as he saw it as a dictatorship. Therefore, it is not surprising the differences arose between Mykola Hmylovy and this federation. And as Yuri Smolich stated, it led into a public conflict. Unfortunately, we do not have an opportunity to reproduce all the collisions and conflicts of 1923, 1924, but even the known facts testify to the gravity of that conflict. Хвильовий quit his job as Holopolit Osvita and was employed as a mechanic at a locomotive factory, allegedly to refresh himself from the suffocating atmosphere. And I quote, he even tried to kill himself, and I quote, "I can shoot myself. I went to the field twice, but both times I returned alive and are harmed." His overall disappointment deepened with creative setbacks. Now I'm not writing anything, and obviously I will not write anymore because the old manner does not satisfy me, and I do not think I have the talent for something new. Hwilui was encouraged by the presence of like-minded friends and their support, as well as the party discussion in Moscow between Trotsky and Zinoviev and Stalin. This discussion raised hopes for democratization of the Soviet system and provided an opportunity for Hwilui to actively defend his position. The catalyst for his involvement was Grigory Yakovenko's article about critics and criticism in literature. It is worth mentioning that starting from the 30th of April 1925, when Mykola Hmylovy's first pamphlet was... I'm sorry, Rostislav, could you speak a bit slower? Well, in order to slow down, probably I should not follow the text that the interpreters have. Well, maybe you could read it out, but you could slow down. Thank you. Well, I should say that it was high time for Vaplite to emerge. As Black Kidney and Pilipenko discussed earlier, an opportunity to create an academy that would resemble the French Academy. The position of Hwilowý on this Academy of Proletarian Literature was supported by Vasily Blakitny and Sergei Pilipenko. Moreover, when Yakovenko's article was published, Hwilowý had an opportunity to look at it before it was published so that he could respond. And response to that article was published right away. It means that Alan Blakitny, as an editor of Kultura and Pobut and Hordy Katsuba were on the par in terms of their views. It is very important to understand that they found common grounds with regard to Vaplite. And this was the beginning of the broader literary discussion. Even responding to Zarov's accusations, Hwilowý wrote about Pilipenko. He is not only a sympathizer, but he is also a Democrat, and we cannot be disrespectful. One more thing I wanted to mention is that the emergence of this Free Academy of Proletariat Literature, Vaplite, offered a new type of relations between the authorities and between the writers. Since this organization was supposed to get allocations from the state, they were supposed to get support to publish their books, and they also were supposed to have an opportunity to publish their own newspapers, and they were supposed to be provided with the accommodation. But at the same time, they were not supposed to interfere, the state was not supposed to interfere into the artistic processes. It is important to say that the creation of the Ukrainian nation is only possible if there is an independent Ukrainian state. And this literary discussion was bringing to the fore the questions about the directions into the Ukrainian literature and the parallels between Ukrainian literature and geopolitical views of the country. Since there was a need of having an independent country with its own army. And of course, that was used as a threat by the Moscow. Kaganovich in 1929 organized a meeting with Ukrainian writers so that Stalin could make sure that all Ukrainians had shared the same views as Хвильовий. Maximenko even found the minutes of this meeting between Stalin and Ukrainian writers, and it was not redacted and it was not censored. These minutes were found at the website of the Harvard University. But let me quote, someone said that someone was referring to the play of Bulhakov, Dni Turbinih, the Turbini days. And the Stalin says, well, you Ukrainians, you have two languages. Eastern Ukrainians do not understand Western Ukrainians. And the Ukrainian writers responded, no, that is not true. We do understand each other. Moreover, one of the participants of this discussion said, in order to promote the Ukrainian language, you have to give us an opportunity to develop Belgorod, Kuban, and Voronezh regions as well, since those are originally Ukrainian regions. Well, probably I will pause here since we all know what happened to Hulavi after that. I also wanted to say that in the fifth volume of Hvilovy's works, I also added some controversial views on the relations between Hvilovy and Yefremov. This information was not published before, but in my opinion, it added additional flavor to better understand this type of relations. Thank you for your attention. And if you don't mind, I would like to share my slides now, and I would like to show you some photos. Yes, you can share your screen now. Can you see it? Yes, we can see your screen. Well, these are the photos of Hvilovy from the mid 1920s. This is his mother, Елизавета Tarasenko Fitilova. The photo taken in July 1928. Dmitro Tabachnik was using this photo when he was in power at the presidential administration. Well, you see that she was still alive in 1928. Here you see the photos of the first wife of Hvilovy, Katerina Hashenko, and you can see his sister. This is a family photo. You see Hvilovy with his second wife, Yulia Umantseva, the one who saved him from Cheka, and who became a protagonist of the novel Kit у чоботях, A Cat in the Boots. And after Хвильовий died, she went back to the Ural, and she died in 1996 in Sverdlovsk. Over here you see the photo of 1922. You see Johansson over here, and Хвильовий is standing over here in the corner. In some of the photos, he was basically rejected from those photos. But in the magazine, there was the original of this photo, and we were able to replicate it with the Hwilowий in it. This is the photo of 1923. You see Kharkiv writers who came to Kiev, and they wanted to build their union heart. And you see who were the famous Ukrainian writers of the 1920s. You see Mykola Zahul, Mykola Zerov, Volodymyr Susura, Хвильовий, Johansson. In this photograph, we see heart, the Union of Proletarian Writers. And on this photo, you see the members of HARD as well. This is Mykola Hwilowий in the first half of the 1920s. And this is his photo with Yanovsky and Ivan Dniprovsky in 1927-1928. Here you see also Valerian Polishchuk and Mykola Hwilowий. Actually, this photo was used for the filmmakers, and it is hard to imagine Kharkiv without these two figures, and their friendship actually in the middle of 1920s came to an end, and they almost became the enemies. This photo is famous as well. It is from the Всесвіт magazine of 1925. You see Alexander Dovzhenko, Kost Gordienko, and Mykola Hwilowий. Gordienko actually lived till the independence of Ukraine. He was buried in Kharkiv. And another photo to share, another photo of that time. And here you see the photo from his funeral, and we can even see his mother in one of these photos. And actually, it was the first meeting of his daughter Iraida and his father. And it was the first time she saw him because her mother was banning her from meeting her father.
And she lived in Kharkiv and Rogan. And here's the picture of Iraida Dmitrievna Krivich. This is Hwiloviy's daughter. Dmitrievna is the patronymic that was taken from the stepdad. And the stepdad adopted her. And the fact that she has a father who is a writer, she learned about it at a very early age, but she sadly saw him for the first time only during his funeral in a coffin. So here are some pictures to add to my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to respond to all your questions if you have any. Thank you so much, Rostislav. Thank you so much for so many details, for so many facts. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please chime in, ask your questions. I think it was incredibly interesting to find out about the early biography of Mykola Hwilowий. The floor is yours. Please, all of our literature scholars and historians. Nadia, would you like to ask? Yes, sure, Nadia, go ahead. Rostislav, thank you so much. It was very interesting. It's such a shame that we didn't have more time to find out even more. But you did intrigue me with this provocative or scandalous, as you have put it, the details about the relationship with Sergei Yefremov. Could you probably at least a little bit more elaborate on this? Which interesting bits and moments did you highlight? Well, I didn't really highlight it, but in the 5th volume, I simply provided publications by Hviliovy that had anti-Yefremov nature to them. Well, most likely, he was given Yefremov's diaries by the investigators, and Hviliovy was looking through those diaries and commenting on what he found there with a somewhat negative perspective, showing Yefremov as very egocentric person, a person who hated Soviet authorities. Well, there was not much to love the Soviets for. And Hviliovy basically participated in bullying Yefremov, right? So what happened in 1929 was the union, which also happened in 1930. These 2 years demonstrated Hviliovy from a very negative perspective. The same happened with Slisarenko, but the first decades of the century is when the historians and literary scholars were trying to not focus too much on that specifically. And when there was an opportunity to show that, I thought, why not? For the historians, we should probably make it available, because I remember some articles, we had to simply look at several sources, because in one library, the part of the newspaper was missing, and the other library, well, you know how the newspapers are being kept in the library archives in Ukraine. So, sometimes I had to put 3 different newspapers together to find out what the text was about. And this is what happened with this entire frame of articles. Do we need them? Well, I think that presently we can talk about this part of his biography too, because Hviliovy was cornered. He was cornered, and the situation was getting worse and worse. And every step he took was making things only worse. And in the end, it led to this tragic period that he put on March 13, 1933. Thank you so much. I think it is of utmost importance, and I think it is important for Ukrainian history and history of culture to be prepared for publishing and discussing various documents which, for one or another reason, were prohibited or not talked about. We have to process all of it from the modern day perspective. And it's important to see and know all of those nuances, see and analyze them. So in my opinion, it is not a scandalous aspect of his biography, but a very positive that allows us to analyze all of this heritage in its complexity, to understand how tragic his destiny was. And some things, well, regarding which we have to be critically minded. Thank you. Yes, I think it is very important to keep in mind that, well, there is a lot of negative stuff said about Hviliovy because he was a communist. Even though there are this Daplete materials and what Sosura wrote, saying that even though they want to represent us in this way, this magenta color of the communist flag, this basically is the flag that is not the red communist flag. It's not the same. It's different. It's the Cossack flag. And this is also very important. And we have to still discuss it. We have to keep discussing it so that during all of this anti-communist sentiment that is so widespread now. We can still preserve our objectivity. And Khvильовий is a person, very complex person. As Fitilov, he decided that he's going to be Хвильовий, but he realized that as Хвильовий, he cannot develop either because Ukraine was not independent back in the day. Thank you. But nevertheless, he also participated in bullying the other group of Ukrainian national movement. And I think it is also an important aspect of his work that we have to also talk about and that we also have to analyze. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, any more questions? Mariana, go ahead. Thank you. I have a question to Rostislav. First, I'd like to express my admiration. You have done so much. This is an amazing achievement. But in the context of the topic mentioned as biography of Хвильовий, I would like to ask you as the main researcher working on the biography of this writer, to what extent and why did Хвильовий build his biography in such a way? I think it is obvious that he changed his name and he was behaving in a certain way. He was presenting himself in a certain way. So why? What was the end goal when he wanted to be perceived in this way? And can we consider that his works are autobiography? And if yes, then what was the starting point when he started using his biography in his literary works? Well, I think that if we take any writer, he or she would rely on their biography to a certain extent. But regarding the way he presented himself, I think that in 1921, 1922, this was probably the first time when he was physically, mentally broken down, when his brother died, when he divorced his wife. It traumatized him at all because the wife later on did not allow him to see his daughter, etc., etc. And you know, he started thinking about creating art from a new perspective, from a new angle. So he starts a new life, and it seems to me that he enters the Ukrainian literature. You know, being a part of Ukrainian literature with the last name Fitilov was not that nice, given that, you know, the foundation should sound Ukrainian. That is why he picks the most suitable pen name. But again, this Fitilov period is left behind completely. He doesn't mention it anywhere else. For example, Bohotухів period in his life, the locations that have to do with the city where he spent a lot of time, where his uncle lived, where he was raised. Or in the fourth volume, there also will be mentioned the articles about the doctor. I don't remember the exact name now, however. And we can find some things that related to where he was living back in the day too. You can see that both in his poetry and his prose. Given that, well, the first volume is just poetry because it helps to understand Хвильовий, because he keeps being a poet in his small prose, in news articles, in newspaper articles, so lyrical hero. And it is very important to also understand that it coincides with how he, as the author, sees that. So this reminiscence can be seen in almost every single work by Хвильовий. I wouldn't say that it is entirely autobiographical, but yes, we do see the bits of his biography here and there if we use psychoanalysis, and we can find bits of his autobiography in his works. Thank you. Thank you. It is incredibly interesting. Thank you, Mariana. Anyone else? Would you like to ask more questions, comments? If not, then may I? Because I have written down some questions. Well, adding to what Nadia just asked, because she was wondering about relationship between Хвильовий and Ефремов, I was wondering what discoveries have you made as a person who knows so much about Хвильовий's biography? Have you discovered something new that has not yet been known to scholars before? Well, I wouldn't say that I made some discoveries, but I rather systemized and made it available to wider public. In principle, it was known before too, but many people could not access it, the same as everything that had to do with his entire frame of activities. Or, you know, 2 novels that were written in 1922 that were not published anywhere. Either the author forgot about them and lost them, or maybe he thought that they were not interesting. But 2 novels by Hulu were not reprinted for 100 years. They were only published in newspapers. Now, talking about magazines, 2 short stories that were written in the second half of 1920s. I don't remember the exact names of them. Doctor's notes, I think one of them was about doctor's notes. They were not reprinted again, even though they were well known. Mr. Tereshchenko, back in the day, in 97, printed it, and no one believed that it was Хвильовий. They said that this was some literary falsification, mystification. But again, we managed to actually confirm that. Or a poem that was found in newspaper that was also not printed ever again. So I wouldn't say that I made any discoveries. Now, I simply brought it all together, compiled it, and all of a sudden it was pretty interesting. Why did no one do that before? Why did no one do that earlier? And I think that this was what I did. I simply compiled it and I presented it. Here, look, we have all of it. Amazing. This is amazing. I think that this is a discovery in itself. Thank you, Rostislav. Oh, by the way, one more thing regarding his biography. I think that Grigory Kostyuk did the most in terms of biography. When he was preparing the previous 5 volumes, he found the relatives who moved to Australia, to the United States of America, all the people he knew outside of Ukraine. Also, aside from that, Volodymyr Panchenko contributed a lot. He visited all the places that related to Хвильовий. He found the funerals where his friends who were shot were buried. He found the school, the walls of those schools, so he was a researcher. Another scholar, Yuri Shapoval, went through the archives, and Nadia Honcharenko mentioned that now he also, aside from the archives, he also found some additional information. So this also gives some new material, but I took what was on the surface, you know, simply systemized it. And this basically for me was a discovery, a revelation. You need to simply to organize it. And then you realize that Хвильовий considered himself to be Ukrainian from the very birth. It was not simply Russian Fitilov, it was Ukrainian. He grew up in Slobozhanщина, and it is pretty typical for that area. And you know, you have to pick, you have to come to an understanding of who do you feel more as, and I think that's how it works. Thank you so much, Rostislav. Ladies and gentlemen, anyone else? Oh, I see a question in the chat box. What could be of interest for the American students when it comes to Хвильовий? And how can we better introduce it into the Slavic departments of universities in the US? Well, it seems to me that we have to talk about the generation of the so-called lost generation. We have to talk about Hemingway, we have to talk about Remarque, we have to talk Хвильовий when it comes to executed Renaissance, Swisarenko, Dniprovsky, and suggest them the prose that covers the events of the World War I, everything that is dedicated to Russia-Ukraine war. And I think that in this context, when you can also provide the comparison with the lost generation that emerged after World War I, and this is how you can draw parallels. Any more questions? If not, then I would like to briefly ask, because we have only 2 minutes left. You have mentioned myths about Хвильовий, and one of the myths has to do with his death. There are lots of myths that pertain to his death. And I always wanted to ask, is it true or that a myth that he wrote a death note where he said, "Long live the Communist Party"? Well, I know that there was such a death note, but no one has seen the original version. Everyone only saw the copy of it. And yes, there was no clear evidence about people. The closest to him, Kulish, and we also know that from his wife, yes. And there was no point to even these closest people, the ones who have managed to survive and go to the West to somehow falsify it. So there is no new information regarding this research. We don't know. Yeah, that's the latest information that I have heard of, but I don't know, maybe we'll find something else. Maybe we'll be able to find the second part of the outcomes too. I don't know. Thank you one more time, Rostislav, for such an amazing presentation. And today, Rostislav has taken a road to torn apart Kiev, and today he is in a Kharkiv that is torn apart. So please stay safe, and thank you one more time for an amazing presentation. Thank you, and I would like to thank this program. In fact, there's an amazing program, so I hope that it will continue. Thank you.
Чудово, дякую за обговорення.
Dear colleagues, thank you for your active participation in our discussion. And I think that now we can proceed with our next speaker.